Welcome back to another episode of the Blockrunner Podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's going on, dude?
On sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
All right, no interview today.
All right.
And we had 2 interviews 2 weeks in a row.
I think we had 3, right? Benny before that?
Oh, yeah, Benny, yeah.
It's been 3 weeks of interviews, dude. Getting some outsider opinions in here.
We got Moon King, we got Benny, and we had the Quantum Expeditions miners.
Yeah, very interesting lineup. So,
And they're all related, right? They're all like Bitcoin NAT related for the most part.
Yeah, Benny being like the master architect of the infra layer of NAT and, you know, DMT protocol and such.
Yeah.
Moon King being an appreciator and enjoyer.
Yeah.
A NAT maxi, if you will, almost a NAT maxi. He's on his way.
Yeah.
I mean, he has quite a track record of, I don't know, like
Calling 1,000 X's.
Right. And then he's, you know, in the trenches like we are, trying to find the next one. Like, even though there's NAT, right, there's a whole world out there of experimentation, and it's important to, like, find the pulse everywhere, right? So he's calling things like index and other Robinhood coins, just like we've been exploring Robinhood.
Yeah.
And then there's Quantum Expeditions. Those guys are obviously in their own center lane as well. It's not like what's going on in the trenches.
Yeah, I mean, we cover a wide spectrum of what's going on in crypto for sure.
Yeah, these guys are talking about like what's going on in Earth's crust. You know, it's like, how do we harvest some of this natural gas? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So we got a little bit of like a, I don't know, like a lesson there. It took 30 minutes, like deep dive into the whole.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's an interesting business. Yeah, so they essentially take natural gas, they feed it into an engine, and then converts electricity.
I think it's brilliant. So
Yeah,
it's like,
great.
let's just bring some freaking box cars out there, just load them up with, like, you know, computers. Yeah, and then just fuel them with like the farts of the earth. Basically.
Yeah, pretty
That's
much
what it is. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great.
So it's like, okay, but what about, you know, the fact that you guys are probably bleeding cash, right? Because Bitcoin is not performing the way everybody who's in that industry was expecting it to, right? We kind of like asked them that, right? And
we kind of did, yeah. Not in those words, but it's like...
well, of course not in those words.
Yeah, it's like, you know, essentially, what do you think of the declining security budget? And mostly, like, everyone responds with, it's not an issue. And I think everyone's preconditioned to say that. And that's like the initial response for everybody. And that tells me that they haven't done the math because...
But it's not even a math issue at this point. Like, they're
feeling it. Yeah.
Because, like, you brought up the point. It's like, at the current price, like, you're not even profitable, right?
Yeah. I asked them if, you know, since you're getting your source of energy for free-ish, right, so to speak,
right,
then that means you should be mining Bitcoin at a lower price than its value.
Yeah.
And so they didn't really respond, so I just assumed that it's at least competitive.
Yeah, maybe their methodology of mining is that good, right? It's like maybe they aren't feeling it as much as others, and that's kind of the point, right? That's the game theory in play here. It's like the other interesting thing about like this conversation with miners directly is they're competing. Like if you and I are different miners, we're competing for the same Bitcoin. And so if your business goes out of business, I actually take market share from you. Right.
And therefore it's better for me as a business for you to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you know, if you're a miner, it's a good thing when you see other Bitcoin miners fail.
Yeah.
It's just what's not good about that is there's a long-term trend of Bitcoin miners failing.
Yeah, they don't care though. They're just in it for the business of it.
Which they shouldn't care. They shouldn't care from a business perspective. But you do want to be in an industry that is thriving
or sustainable
or growing. You want that.
Yeah.
And so if your industry is not growing, then you're thinking about supporting AI. You're thinking about doing other things that are not related to Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, for sure. But I think they're taking the position of, you know, not only are they positioning better by miners failing, it's just also miners not necessarily failing, they're just leaving, like just out of free will because they see a better opportunity elsewhere. So it's like by them, they're just naturally winning in the context of Bitcoin's game theory, you know, play out here. So that's a viable strategy.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. It's just you want to be in a industry that is growing, and Bitcoin
Well,
mining, it's not growing because we have an exponential factor
yeah.
that decays every 4 years.
Yeah, but that's not what's being broadcasted, right? And that's not, the optics of growth is still there, meaning like the price of Bitcoin
Sure.
still is higher than what it was.
Yeah, it's 60, not 15, right?
Right,
4
yeah.
years ago it was 15. Now it's at 60.
Correct. So yeah, it's like it might not be as high as you would want it to be, but as long as it's still continuing to grow, it's like I guess the alarm bells aren't ringing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Now some alarm bells are ringing. I see you got something pulled up here from Michael Saylor. There's what is it? A security?
It's a security consortium. So it's today we're launching a Bitcoin security consortium backed by 15 million in commitments to support the developers and researchers strengthening Bitcoin for the decades ahead. And so I read this document, and let's actually click on it. There's an individual here named Mike Schmidt, the executive director of Brink. He's going to be heading this whole initiative, completely for free as a nonprofit. And the whole point of this is that we have several companies. I think there's several companies contributing to this $15 million pot here to secure Bitcoin. And right now, their main focus is to secure Bitcoin against quantum threats.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Without even reading this.
Yeah.
It's like there's no way they're actually acknowledging like that there's a security problem like in relation to the
correct.
the budget dilemma. They're hot and bothered by the front and center topic of quantum. Has to be.
Yeah, I mean, their investors. I mean, Michael Saylor has his own investors, his own LP providers, and all of them are asking, "What are you going to do about this quantum threat?"
Yeah, I mean,
and here's what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's a legitimate like gripe, and
It
it's
is.
preventing like institutional players from again giving Bitcoin any play again because you got big tech industry titans telling you it's a problem, so you got to listen.
Yeah, and it's a problem not only for Bitcoin but for Google and everybody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everyone has to update their systems because today's public asymmetric cryptography is not enough to eliminate this threat. So you have to switch to new algorithms.
So how does this work? It's $15 million here. Like
It doesn't really say. It's
Okay.
it's sort of like I don't know. It's not necessarily a pot of 15 million. It's more like companies have committed X amount of money that totals to 15 million.
right, but yeah. So like if somebody comes up with something, and then like this consortium agrees like this is worthy, then we got at least 15 million here to like back you.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. I mean, yeah. If it's not that like concretely, explained, then this is probably more of like optics than anything, right?
Yeah, consortiums are very difficult to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Remember there was a metaverse consortium,
I do remember that.
and I'm
bunch of
still
companies.
receiving those emails, dude.
Yeah. Every big major tech company was
All of them.
part of that consortium.
All of the companies that we're all used to, even like Coca-Cola was in there.
Yeah.
All the companies were part of this consortium, except for us. They didn't invite us.
But we finagled our way in there.
I mean, we did. I mean, we're part of the email list.
Didn't we attend some of the calls, the meetings? It
Yeah.
was largely like nothing, but
Yeah, it's nothing.
it's just people like spouting ideas and then people sitting in their goons,
I really-
representatives.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're doing, but
Yeah.
they're still sending out emails and they're still like doing calls.
They're consorting, dude.
Yeah.
Consorting or whatever.
So my point is that these consortiums, they don't necessarily
Yeah.
do anything, but they sometimes can do something.
Well, let's hope, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about it from a different perspective. Is that they're identifying a threat to Bitcoin called quantum. There is an impending threat, declining security budget. Eventually, they will identify this as a problem,
Right.
and so they're going to have to talk about it. And the NAT community needs to inject itself as part of the conversation. And so I wrote this tweet here. Let me see if I can find it.
The NAT community is always injecting themselves, which is always a pleasurable sight to see. You guys are literally like truly gnats,
Yeah, you're NATs. Yeah,
like gnats, like little, those little flies that are just like everywhere. You can't get rid of them.
yeah,
That's-
yeah.
What a proper like
Yeah.
accidental naming.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, it's not an annoying out of like the
Just remember.
the sake of being annoying.
Yeah.
Is like the NAT supporters and believers are all over crypto Twitter. for a purpose, right?
Yeah, it's like a good purpose.
I would think so. Trying to get spread awareness to like these problems and such.
Yeah, there's a meteor coming.
Yeah,
you can see it right now. It's like it's in the sky.
Yeah, but nobody cares. They rather like
don't look up.
They want to zap these little fucking bugs.
Yeah,
dude.
right.
They're in the air. It's like, get away.
Yeah. All right. So here's a tweet kind of referring to Michael Saylor. It says quantum and declining security budget are the biggest threats to Bitcoin. They are both solvable. There isn't a bigger community concerned about the declining security budget than DMT NAT. There are over 40,000 supporters supporting a market-driven second subsidy with over 60% of global hash power support. This is what non-complacency looks like. The declining security budget may not be obvious today, but it's an exponential path to be glaringly obvious. Exponentials are hard to imagine since we tend to think linearly. And then I added some of these experts like Justin Bonds and a Bitcoin core developer and the guy who created blockchain, I should say. They all predict that we may have one or two halvenings before the confidence in Bitcoin is seriously challenged. And then the Bitcoin's immune system is working.
Wonderful, dude.
Yeah, so
great tweet.
So I think it's important that that part of the conversation in terms of security of Bitcoin, it's definitely quantum, but it's also the declining security budget. It's definitely not obvious, but all you need to do is the math, and it just reveals itself.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. Like after that minor conversation, I left pretty heated.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was obvious on camera. Probably not, because like literally we only had like 5 minutes to talk about NAT.
Yeah,
and like literally like the instant reaction from them was just like an instant like write off. It's like, yeah, it's an airdrop coin. We've seen plenty of those, and they typically end up not really resulting in anything of true long-term value.
Yeah.
But whatever you guys send to us, like, yeah, we're going to sell it. So, yeah, we appreciate it.
But thanks.
But yeah, like,
thanks for the cheddar.
And it's just like, it's frustrating because, again, it's a community who's completely aligned and pouring a lot of effort into, like, solving your business, your problems for your business, right? And, like, there's really not much you could do as like a company other than like sustain and grow your operations, other than, here's another vertical that can like, subsidize these operations. Like all you have to do really is just help out. Like just don't squash it.
Yeah.
Just let it grow.
Yeah.
Right?
It is a weird take, right? There's a community out there identifying a problem within your business and is directly funding you,
funneling, like fueling value to you, and like your reaction is to like, again, like a gnat, like SWAT. Where's my swatter?
Yeah,
I can't hear this anymore.
Yeah,
this is like annoying to me.
Yeah,
it's like we're trying to make you more money, dude. It's like fuck off. Like what? Yeah. So and it's weird because that seems to be a common reaction from like the Western miner community.
Yeah.
But the Eastern mining community obviously has a complete opposite reaction. We just look at the adoption list.
Yeah.
They're all from the East. So it's like, what is it? Well, what is that communication lapse? Or is it like a cultural lapse between the two sides of, our species on Earth here? Like, what's the problem? And then it got us thinking about maybe we need different like communication methodologies to like convince the Western audience. It's like, maybe we need a documentary.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
we
need to make a movie.
Yeah, maybe it's like we can't just tell people. Maybe it's like the West is convinced by, I don't know, like things like the Zeitgeist movie. Remember?
Yep.
That was a very impactful film. It like catalyzed the movement, if you will, and like the Occupy Wall Street movement.
It did, yeah.
Convinced a lot of people that there's a real issue in our money system.
Yeah.
Right? And potentially could have been like a driving force to, catalyzing Satoshi Nakamoto to devise Bitcoin in the first place.
100%. Yeah. So that movie came out in 2007. I saw it in 2007. It really changed my entire understanding of reality. The fabric of reality was disintegrated.
Right.
After watching that movie.
Exactly. And how did it achieve that, like dismantling? Yeah. By essentially inundating you with like a nonstop flow of like factualities, right?
And emotional like aspects too, right? There's like missiles going off, people are getting killed,
right?
And you're sort of like emotionally engaged.
Yeah. So that's the part of the film that like keeps you hooked.
Yeah.
So you keep watching, right? But it's the divulgence of like
Sure.
information that
Absolutely.
you were not privy to at the moment, right?
Yeah.
It's not stuff they teach you in school.
Yeah.
Right. It's not stuff like that the talking heads are like openly admitting for a purpose, right?
Yeah. So in that movie, the first movie, it talked about three things. It talked about religion, and then 9/11, and then the most important part is how money works.
Right. Yeah, because that's kind of like
And
the whole.
The money part was the thing that blew my mind
Mhm.
because I couldn't believe how fiat was like this manipulated like instrument
Mhm.
that was completely controlled and is like just fake. The whole thing is just fake.
Right.
And I couldn't believe it at the time. And the interesting thing about the videos is you don't have to believe me in any of this. You do your own research.
Right.
And so I spent months and months confirming that this is how the fiat system worked with fractional reserve banking and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, it is exactly how the video demonstrated it.
Yeah, I really wish part 2 like had like a Bitcoin section.
I know.
It definitely could have, but Peter Joseph is actually not a fan of Bitcoin, believe it or not. The guy who created these films.
Yeah.
Because he created a few more of them, and most of them were centered around this topic of like, you know, the monetary system, capitalism being the root of like a lot of like humanity's inequities, right? So we should transition ourselves as a species to a much more resource-based economy, and you know, it's whatever, right? That's the pitch.
Yeah,
that's the proposed solution. How do you get to that point? That was a little bit like nebulous.
Yeah.
Up in the air.
Yeah.
It just so happens to be like, you know, the forces of capitalism like created an Elon Musk.
Yes.
Who's like kind of like engineering our humanity in that direction.
That's
anyways,
right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
By happenstance. And eventually we'll get there. But the point being, like that film itself, like that was the proper packaging to dismantle like a long held belief for a lot of people, right? Religion, obviously, the longest held belief system to our like species. Almost impossible to like rattle that for most people.
Yeah.
It's questionable whether you should even do that because for some people that's a pillar that should not be wreckaged, but for others it's okay, right? You seem fine. You seem okay. You haven't like blown anything up yet.
Yeah, not yet.
But the other ones, but he used the same methodology to like dismantle. So Bitcoin needs some dismantling. There's clearly there's some long held beliefs around Bitcoin that are like unsustained.
Yes.
That shouldn't be sustained. And the problem is it hasn't been properly packaged. Like how do you inform those people that like the thing that they believed in for the last 15, 20 years is actually wrong?
Yeah.
Right. It's
see the way that I think about it is Michael Saylor, Brian Armstrong, and these huge like Bitcoin and crypto people, they've done the math. They've done like the napkin math. That's the minimum requirements to understand this problem. They've done it. But I think they're actively ignoring it because there isn't a simple solution. And so they just rely on Satoshi's white paper says the fees will pick up and it'll solve everything. Mm-hmm. But when you do the math, the fees have to grow. And if the fees grow, people use the Bitcoin network a lot less. And so if they use it a lot less, then what's going to pay for the security of the network? And they don't have a solution for that. And therefore, they don't talk about it. And if anyone asks, their simple answer is fees.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the dogma. That's the belief. And that is what you're talking about that needs to be dismantled because that is not accurate. That is not true. It's not going to work that way.
Yeah, but you need something more than just words, right? To like really like stab at the soul of the person you're trying, again, to kind of like rattle. Meaning like you need the visual absurdity of like that exponential, the exponentiality of that assumption.
Yeah.
Like what does that visually even mean? Like human beings it's a difficult thing to even like perceive. Yeah. But like visually it can be like demonstrated how absurd, like what that looks like. Right. And so, film.
Yeah.
With this, it's like, it's more effective than like, some lines on a chart. Right. It's like, I look at that and, whatever, dude.
Yeah.
But show me like a film again that has those emotional hooks.
Yeah.
And like has like this daunting music.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about like film creation here, which we're no experts in.
Right.
We're just kind of like hoping this manifests somewhere somehow because there's a pretty big community out there of natters.
Yeah.
I know one of you out there has this inside of you.
The skills to make a movie here.
Yeah, because it's, I mean, with AI, don't use too much AI, but you might probably have to for like, budgets case. Because too much AI might be like a turnoff for some people. I don't know. It's like it's up in the air how you creatively approach a project like this, but I feel like it's fundamental in my opinion.
Yeah, I think part of the problem that's contributing to this is the misunderstanding of Bitcoin. So, like for example, Satoshi called the Bitcoin network Bitcoin, and really the whole point of Bitcoin is that it does one thing very, very well. It converts energy into security, and so that means that more energy being consumed equals more security. And the only thing that sustains that equation is, in order to spend more energy, you need more money. And right now, all the money that miners are receiving come from the primary Bitcoin subsidy. And that Bitcoin subsidy is being decayed at exponential rate every single 4 years. And so the only thing that mitigates that is a price growth of exponential gains. Mm-hmm. And you cannot have exponential growth. And so if that's not possible, then what is it that's going to solve this problem? And so that's why we have this market-driven second subsidy that doesn't decay away, and it's completely up to the market to decide what is the value of Bitcoin security.
Right. Yeah.
So if you value it high, then right now at a 50 million market cap, then that's a pretty good opportunity.
That's a buy.
Yeah, that's a buy. If you value it, if the security, the securitized version of Bitcoin security in the form of NAT, it's too valuable, then you sell it. And this is a purely market-driven solution, which is unlike anything anyone has proposed before. This hasn't been a talking point at any point within the history of Bitcoin. And so this is like a new experiment that, from what I can tell, from napkin math perspective, Bitcoin fails without NAT. And with NAT, it has an actual ability to grow in security, not decline in security.
Right. So then the flow of that film, assuming it's an hour long, starts off with, I don't know, some sort of...
It's a montage of Michael Saylor and Antonopoulos and all these like big Bitcoiners saying that Bitcoin is perfect,
right,
and nothing is wrong with it.
Okay.
And it's like just a montage of everything is, blue skies and rainbows.
Okay. And then the following sequences of what comes after that, it's the math, right?
Then it's like Bitcoin miners are pivoting to AI.
Okay. A little bit of some fear.
Bankruptcy.
Right.
Stuff like that. So it's like all the talking heads are saying everything is fine, and when in reality everything is falling apart actually. And so then it's like, okay, then what's going on here? Why are they, selling snake oil while, things are actually collapsing and they're saying everything's fine? It's like, what's happening?
Mm-hmm. And then the ending portion becomes like an actual solution, right? Because that is what was lacking from, I guess, Zeitgeist.
It was lacking. Yeah. Watching that movie, it was like mind blowing. And then it's like, you're mind blown, but you don't have any direction.
Call to action, I guess.
There's no call to action. You have this all this surge of energy without knowing what to do with.
Yeah, which is potentially dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's like people don't have any. Yeah, so a little bit was like a reluctancy, I guess, of the man himself who generated all that energy to actually be like the
orchestrator.
Yeah, whatever. Because of that imposes new risks, right? If you become like a legitimate cult leader or like what do you call that? Just like a movement head, right?
Yeah.
And then you're a target, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, he was on Joe Rogan at least once, if not more than once.
I saw him there once, but it's on Joe Rogan where he says like, I don't want to be a leader to this thing that I created.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of like it's in the open. It's like, hopefully somebody can take on that position.
Yeah.
It never really happened.
It's just that there wasn't a call to action. It was more like a realization that everything is kind of messed up, and it's like, that's it. That's the message.
Right.
So then what do you do with that?
So in our film, it's like everything is messed up, but here's what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Here's the proposed solution. It's very simple. It's the least friction-bearing solution in existence as of today.
Yeah.
Right? It's literally buy NAT, right?
Yeah, I mean, how
It's
much
the-
more frictionless experience do you need to solve a problem, right? All you got to do is buy it, and it's solved.
Yeah, it's the same thing you tell people to do whenever they agree to Bitcoin being a solution to
That's right.
fiat, right?
That's right.
Buy Bitcoin.
Yes.
That's it.
That's it.
Like, so why is that such like a drastic leap for anybody who's on like the Western side of things and like is skeptical?
Yeah,
It's
I think another part of why I think they're initially skeptical is because first they think Bitcoin's perfect, but then they think inside the box of Bitcoin. It's like, what do I need to do to the code to like address the issue? And there's literally nothing you can do to the code to solve this problem.
Right.
And because people have thought about it. They said we should make Bitcoin infinite, or we should make Bitcoin a proof of stake, proof of authority.
Or we should tax your holdings.
Exactly, tax it.
Yeah.
And these are all things that can be done in the code, and none of them are viable.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all destructive propositions. So it's like, again, here comes this non-destructive proposition.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest thing we all understand how to do. There's no like change in human behavior required.
Yeah.
Where's the resistance?
Yeah. How could anyone resist this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because it's a new thing. You know, there's trust, I guess. Like, who are these guys? You know,
Yeah.
it's like Adam Back initially just immediately assumed it's just some team out there that
Yeah, that pre-mined. Yeah, so here's an example. So we were talking to Mati from Quantum Expeditions. He was like, "That's just an airdrop coin. It's not a big deal." And so Adam said the exact same thing. He says it doesn't solve anything because it has zero fundamental value, just like the other air coins. And so he's referring to like coins that get pre-mined, coins that get airdropped, all that stuff. And this is a good initial assumption when it comes to crypto, because that is often a true case. It's just not a case that happens every single time.
right.
So here, that Adam Back situation, we highlight it in the NAT paper, is that, yes, you can assume everything is, bullshit and it's a scam and it's pre-mined. That's a safe assumption, but not everything has that outcome. And so sometimes it's worth actually looking into it.
Yeah. So, but that is where the initial skepticism comes from.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that like frequency of being let down by that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of scams in crypto. So
It's understandable then. It's per the nature of, growing something organically. You're gonna come into those roadblocks of friction. So in a sense, it's like, yeah, we brought on some miners who are literally on the ground level, like dealing with this. Like we're just kind of like observing it.
yes.
They're actually living it through. And they are like participating in the network and they are a representation of everything we say is like sacred to the value of Bitcoin, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, let's bring some of these people on. Let's share ideas. And if they're not going to immediately agree that this is like a viable thing, that's to be expected, right? This is part of the course of human nature. It's part of the understanding of like how difficult like Nat's journey is actually going to be, right?
Yeah.
Expect it, basically. Like not everyone's going to agree. A large portion of the network does agree, though, which is a
It's true.
good sign.
Yeah, here's that large portion here. Up here. So Ampool, Via PTC, F2 Pool, Spider Pool, and Luxor. Luxor, I think, is an American-based company. So
Maybe we should reach out to them.
yeah, have them on the podcast and
Yeah, let's
see
discuss.
what's up.
Maybe they'll give us good, documentary juices.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we properly do this, dude? Because, the Zeitgeist film, it poked at very core pillars of humanity, right? Religion,
Assumptions. Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
I guess the 9/11 segment is a little,
Yeah. That
little
was, yeah.
woo-woo. But that's more of like a poking at your confidence and conviction in like government, I guess, actually
Yeah.
being like a trusted entity or not. Things like that.
Yeah. Really, the second movie, which I think came out in 2009 or 2010, was the better movie. And I don't think it talks about 9/11. I don't know if it talks about religion, though.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So yeah, those of you guys who are going now to go watch these things after we mentioned them, you're probably gonna totally think we're some fucking weirdos now, or not. I don't know. I mean, it's an old thing and it looks weird as hell. and it's a little bit like hypnotic, and it's like visual effects.
Yeah, I would say it's sort of like initially off-putting because it's like there's like 10 minutes of just weird sounds.
That's right.
And it gets you into a mood.
Am I being like brainwashed
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
Like mind controlled a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like the intent.
And it's really difficult to find the actual movie like complete online just because there's so many parts of it that has to get blurred out and cut out and all that stuff. And I mean, we got the original DVDs for this movie.
You've got the original DVDs.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's how it spread in 2007. Remember, I think YouTube came out in 2005.
Uh-huh.
And so initially this movie was on like Google, or not Google, Vimeo or something. It was a competitor to YouTube at the time.
Yeah, I saw it on one of those like dark websites. You know, I forget which one, E-Bombs World or
Yeah.
Mucho Succo or something like that. It's basically a porn site, like way back in the day.
Yeah.
But they eventually, every now and then, they had like, which is weird, off the wall films, right? And back in that day, I was very much into like 9/11 conspiracy stuff. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, 9/11 was still fresh, and it was like the biggest thing that happened in my life.
Sure.
Like literally, like the biggest. It was probably like 9/11 and like the Charlie Kirk assassination. That might be like the only two like real like earth-breaking public events where it's like the Matrix like showed itself a little bit. Like,
yeah.
Like the wirings were revealed.
Sure.
For a moment, right?
Yeah.
In my life, like, you know, in the context like what's happening, everything else is just like a news story, right?
Yeah.
But those two were like, oh shit.
Yeah, it happened at your front door essentially.
That's what it felt like. Even though I was like a wee lad.
Yeah.
2001. Still, I knew, I was like, this is a big deal. Like, this is gonna change some things, and you know, we're witnessing history. Like, I even understood that in the 6th grade, right? It's like,
yeah, that's crazy. You understood it. I didn't even understand it. I was in high school.
Yeah, a lot of that also came from my, like, as a kid, I was very much into like history and like studying World War II.
Yeah,
so
that's
like,
crazy.
I don't know why.
I hated history.
I loved it. Especially World War II history. And I naturally assumed, because I had in my brain the context of like American war was like World War II, I assumed it's like the Japanese are probably responsible for this, because the last time we were attacked like this was Pearl Harbor, right? So
right.
Like, they're at it again, dude. I didn't know there was like a Middle East conflict. I wasn't like paying attention to the Gulf War episodes, right? So, but I was obviously way off the mark. But then I caught knowledge of what's going on in the Middle East. And I couldn't detach myself from like trying to understand, like, what are we doing over there?
Yeah.
Why are we sending troops?
Yeah,
to this weird corner of the earth.
Yeah, so the reason we're talking about 9/11, because in the movie, Peter Joseph alludes to a conspiracy theory that the United States was behind it, contributing, you know, negligent or whatever. Yeah. And so those parts are not that important, like in the context of like the money part. The money is real.
Yeah, but
it's the whole. The movie feels like it's a whole conspiracy theory.
Right. My point in bringing up these things is because they're so fundamental and core to like our human experience, like religion, money, and I guess, I don't know, faith in government. Yeah. It's like whenever you produce like a Bitcoin version of a film like this, I don't know if it's gonna hit like those topics.
Yeah,
right?
I totally agree.
I mean, it might hit for a very obvious specific demographic, which is like people who actually care about Bitcoin.
Yeah, and who understand money.
Right, but you got to inject other like elements into this film, I think, that pokes at again like our core humanities, like the perception of value and stuff like that. Like like that can be a whole chapter sequence in itself. It's like kind of like it is kind of absurd to observe how human beings come to value things like over time historically, like these shiny metals and such. Sure, like that is kind of
it's like gold is really valuable, right, guys? But palladium, is more rare than gold, and it's less valuable.
Yeah, well, who gives a fuck? Yeah. You know, that's what I mean. It's like
doesn't look good in a watch. Well,
yeah. What the hell's palladium? Who even wants to say that word? Palladium, dude. It's not gold. Yeah. Right. So it's like that's what I mean. There's these constructs of belief, not just around religion or faith in government or faith in conviction in money. It's like in value itself, right?
Yeah,
like, let's dissect that, and like let's, after you kind of like see that, then it's like, oh shit, I need to kind of unrattle my own conviction around like what everybody else sees as valuable.
Yeah.
As like a starting point, right?
Sure.
So that I can even like open myself up to the idea, like this new thing that we're kind of constructing ourselves to value in Bitcoin. It's like, maybe it's not
that's perfect.
As valuable as these people who we're about to see in these like future segments.
Yeah.
It is to be, right? Maybe they're repeating what human beings have done in the past, right? So like let's understand that.
Yeah.
Like the nature of all that.
Remember I shared with you it was sort of like the beginning of a documentary film on Zcash. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was only like a few months ago, but it was like, I want to say, I don't think Adam Back was on there, but there was a bunch of Bitcoin OGs who were talking about, privacy and all that stuff, how important it is. And it was all in relation to Zcash. But the whole point was the production was a documentary.
Right.
And so they have it right.
So maybe that is the move.
It probably is.
Damn. Yeah, because I don't know. It's like, maybe we're just not good, what is it, debaters? We're not master debaters. I don't know if that's what's required here to be a master debater.
Maybe so.
In order to sway like the again, like the Western side.
I feel like you cannot defeat my math argument. I don't think there's a debate here. That's why there hasn't been a debate.
Well, there needs to be. You need to find you need to find your victim and go for full assault, dude.
Yeah.
And then we need to document it and put it all over the internet.
Yeah, it's sort of like when CZ spoke with Peter Schiff, yes, I say Joseph.
Yeah.
And he pulled out a gold bar, and it was like Peter was like, "Wow, is that real?" And then everybody laughed. It's like, "Well, I don't know if it's real," and that was like the whole point. Yeah, you can't really know that gold bar is real.
That's a good little jab for sure. That's part of like dismantling that I'm talking about. Dismantling your own like perceptions of things. It's like you have so much confidence and conviction in something that you can't even like identify as like if it's real or not at face value. Like, but still, you assume it to have all this value when it could not.
That's right.
It could not even be the thing that you assume it to be. It's like So how can you attack things like Bitcoin, like that are actually like verifiable?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah.
So
That's like why it's so confusing to me is I feel like I'm the only one doing the math here. I mean, there's a few others for sure. It's just there's so few people doing the math and they're just blindly thinking that everything's fine, which is so surprising to me that they just have the position that someone else told them to, that fees are going to be fine and everything's fine and don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And like that, you just move on with your life. Like that's just a weird thing for me to like comprehend that that's what's happening.
Yeah. So part of that conversation we had after, that podcast was, okay, maybe we need to film. And then it's like, okay, should we do it? And it's like, quickly realize we can't. We don't have like the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a project like this requires a lot of like passion and involvement. It's like
dedication to only that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you'll never finish.
Yeah, and if you haven't noticed, we're like up to a lot of things, and now including like the investigation of Robinhood as like a new layer of interesting things that are happening on chain in relation to like the evolution of crypto. Like, and why that's important to us is because like that's been our trajectory since the beginning. It's like always trying to find that, and like really anchoring into it because that typically presents the next big opportunity for not just ourselves but like the entire market, right? It's like that's the story of crypto. It's like, just waiting for these next big vectors to arrive, and then who's gonna like go in there, understand it to its fundamental natures, and like amplify it to its like maximum potential.
Yeah.
Early tinkerers on Ethereum did that with DeFi.
That's right.
And NFTs and all this stuff. And we had an explosion of interest because of that. So it's like, is this new primitive Robinhood's bringing tokenized equities, tokenized commodities, tokenized whatever, right? Like RWAs. Is this the next big inflection point for crypto? It's like,
I mean, ultimately, we're builders. We're not filmmakers.
That too.
But yet we identify how important a film is in the context of getting people to understand that Bitcoin is not perfect, and it's fine. It's actually okay because it's an engineered product that you can fix. Right. It's not like some construct that's like nebulous in the air. It's like you can actually address issues here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the point of Bitcoin, is that it has an immune system that allows people to contribute to the network. And there was like a tweet by Michael Saylor, is that if you contribute money, power, and like something else, is like you're actually contributing to Bitcoin.
Right.
And it's like that's what NAT is.
Yeah. Which means what exactly?
Yeah, it's he wasn't referring to BIP 110, which we haven't really talked about either.
Yeah, so it was like a little bit of like a nod to the ordinals, I guess, right? Inscriptions. Yeah. It's like, this stuff is contributing.
It does.
Even though there's people saying it's like, damaging.
Right. Yeah, speaking of BIP 110, it's getting no actual technical support, meaning from miners. But yet everybody's talking about it. Michael Saylor's talking about it. There's a deadline in August. And
it's coming up very soon.
Yeah, it's like a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And no real adoption, right? There's some Bitcoin nodes running Bitcoin NOTs, but 90% is running core. So it's getting largely ignored. And the point is that everybody's talking about it, where we have something like NAT, 60% miner adoption. No one's really talking about it. So it's like you got to be more controversial, which is the whole point of the conversation we had with Moon King. It's like you got to tell people that they're wrong and be more controversial. So that way they respond back. They clap back.
Oh, Lord. Here we go, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those tweets too. Like, I think the community heard that message, and some have taken that to heart too. That's not to say like people are out there like being total douchebags in public.
No,
now.
I don't think so either.
I haven't seen that, but I've definitely been seeing like a rally behind this idea that Bitcoin will die without NAT, right?
Yeah.
And like being that explicit with like the messaging, like not so like handling the situation with like, too much finesse.
Yes.
It's like being much more like brute with it. It's like a better approach, I guess. Or just another approach and see if that actually, transpires in anything new.
Yeah, and I want to highlight is the idea, the controversial concept of Bitcoin will die. We're not the only ones saying that, right? Mm-hmm. There are other people. This guy is a core developer, and he says we might have only 2 halvings left before this becomes a serious issue. And he's referring to the declining security budget, right? Here's the miner revenue based on the market cap. Market cap goes up, miner revenue goes down, and this is not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And so we have a Bitcoin core developer saying that. We have Nikita from Blockchair. It says, it's now clear in practice that users won't pay large fees. Bitcoin needs to plan its security under the assumption that the fee rate will remain at 1 sat. And then finally, Justin Bonds, he's a longtime researcher. It says, as high fees price out all use cases, rendering it useless, low fees endanger the security budget and are only a consequence of it never being used. So yeah, we're not the only ones saying these things. We just happen to find a viable solution that is more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah, I mean, let that fester.
Yeah.
However it does. But again, it's like.
So we're supposed to go on a Twitter space with Quantum Expeditions and Mati.
Okay.
Maybe next week, because I think he said he was going to be in Dubai this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, we're happy to come on, and I want them to understand the math here, as it's, this is like an emotional thing, and this is not attacking anybody's business or anything. It's more about understanding that the industry as a whole is on the decline. The industry. Now, you may be performing well within that industry. Like, for example, Foundry, they don't care that Bitcoin has a declining security budget because all these miners are failing. For example, SEC Pool announced that they're done. Right? So that's good for Foundry. They get a little bit more share. They're a little bit more Bitcoin per block, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, ultimately, Foundry doesn't care if they're the last ones. but they are getting a bigger and bigger market share of a declining industry.
Right.
That is not good. Not good for Foundry and not good for anybody.
Yeah. So then what's the takeaway from the conversation, you think, on the Twitter space? Like, is there an objective? Is it like...
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't think it's going to be more of a debate, but in any discussion, I don't think the point of the discussion is to convince the person you're talking to. I think it's more of to convince the audience.
Well, the most effective way to do that would be to convince the person you're talking to, right? I mean,
yeah, but you could never do that. Even
it's
in a
really
debate.
tough. Yeah. Typically, people don't concede in debates.
Correct, they don't.
They typically hold firm.
Yeah.
It's like you have a position, and the other person has a position, and it's like you're just back and forth.
Yeah, and I think the point of debates is the audience has to decide. It's like he's right or he's right.
Yeah. So then that's basically it. Just have like an honest, open discourse and debate if it gets to that point, which, likely will, because they disagree fundamentally. Like the line that I took away from the brief moment we had to even talk about NAT was, we're properly incentivized already, right? So like a second subsidy, the implication being like a second subsidy is like
unnecessary,
fundamentally unrequired.
Yeah.
In order for us to keep maintaining what it is that we're interested in, right? It's like, setting up these fart absorbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These earthly, ghastly engines of miners, right? It's cool. Like, I think it's cool to see. Not only is it cool, it's like apparently a net positive for like the environment, right?
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
If this is just like flatulence, just like being tossed in the air, nobody's willing to capture it for whatever reason. It's like, this is good. If we can make more of this, it's like, and it's part of like a systemic operation. Like, it's a net gain for everything.
Yeah. I think they only have a misunderstanding is because they haven't really looked into it. Like if you're a business and you're a miner, you're not necessarily concerned with the whole network effect and the overall trajectory of Bitcoin's like security budget. Like that isn't like a day-to-day concern. Your day-to-day concern is I got my electricity bill and I got my costs and I have my income. They're not equaling right now. So what do I need to do to make this profitable? So I got to go and find oil fields, right, that are burning gas. Right, or I got to find cheaper electricity, and that's it. That is like your consumption, your brain consumption, right? But when it comes to a larger industry, like this isn't a well like researched thing,
right? Yeah.
So I think it's ultimately we're going to require them to do some due diligence to have even a proper debate, and I don't think they'll do that.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, nonetheless, this is what we're up to because we gotta. Again, there's a lot of things happening. We're in that critical zone of like the market cycle where, it's unknown whether we're at a bottom point or not. And, the noise is at its like most silent of decibel. So like, this is the make or break point typically for things that are going to like really shine next cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens during these like, periods. So, NAT obviously has a big opportunity to be a big narrative point of next cycle. So like, what do you do in these moments in order to like, increase its presence in the market, right? There's a lot of things you could be doing.
Yeah. So this coming November is going to be NAT's 3-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. And in 3 years, I feel like this is far from dead, right? Because we've seen charts where it like peaks and it just goes to nothing forever.
Yeah, we saw something recently in one of our videos. What was it? Punk Strategy?
Punk Strategy, yeah.
Yeah, not to like say it wasn't like a worthy attempt at a project. It was at the time, but yeah, it doesn't display like, further down the road signs of life the way NAT has.
Yeah.
Right? So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I feel like this is something here, right?
Yeah.
If you're just looking at this, there's something happening here where this token just doesn't die.
Right. Yeah, that's what you're looking for. Something with like actual. I mean, there's a name for it, right? The Lindy effect.
Lindy effect, yeah.
It's like the longer this goes on, 3 years from now, we look at the chart and it's a continuation of this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it becomes like you've got to be paying attention to this thing, right?
Yeah, at least understand why it exists. I mean,
at that point, it'll probably be like resting around like a 500 million market cap instead of a 50 million.
That's right. Yeah.
Peaking at like a 2, 3, 4, 5 billion market cap or something. Who knows, right? This is how these things oscillate over
That's
time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, oscillators are. I mean, Bitcoin is an oscillator.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm sure if you went back to the first 2.5 years of Bitcoin's history, it'll look probably very similar to this.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And speaking of oscillator, that's why this thing exists, because people are claiming that Bitcoin's trajectory is on the power law, and the power law is not what people think it is. Kind of like the law of gravity, the laws of physics. These are laws that you cannot escape, right? You can't just bend these laws.
Right.
But power law, you kind of assume that this is like some force of nature, that Bitcoin has to follow this trajectory. Power law is actually a description of a network effect. That's what power law is. And things follow a power law as long as the fundamentals are there. And so what we're saying is, in Bitcoin, the security budget is on the decline, and therefore the security is on the decline, and therefore will not follow the power law because it has a fundamental issue. And so that's the point of this, is that even if it does follow this power law, and we have Bitcoin performing on the power law, you could tell that the declining security budget ends up going to zero, to the point where NAT is contributing over or close to 100% of the security budget. Like, this is a fundamental issue. And that's the whole point of this thing, is that you can actually see it and play out over time. But so TJ, I have a question. When did you first hear about the Zeitgeist movement?
Oh, I want to say when I first heard about it, it was probably back when E-Bombs World days with Iman.
Yeah.
So
did
you tell him about it, or
yeah, it went around our circle.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we would have like, go to Hooters and shit. Be eating some wings. It's like, dude, did you know our government's like fucking us? Like,
yeah, and I was like, cool, dude, I'm 12.
Right. It's like, I got some films. I got some CDs you should see,
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it's like we'd be hanging out and playing Counter-Strike, and like in between Counter-Strike sessions, it's like, yeah, pop up E-Bombs rolled, and it's like, oh, there's like a 9/11 video. Let's watch it.
Yeah.
It's like I was obsessed with like the fact that the Pentagon blew up, but there was like no fucking plane wreckage anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like, what happened there, dude? There's like so many conspiracy videos about that, and
It was, yeah.
that really penetrated my brain to like always have a distrust for anything that anybody tells me.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So TJ, did your like, I don't know, mind change when you saw that?
Dude, I faded completely.
Really?
I mean, we're fucking
Could not care less.
kids, dude. Like, we're just trying to like play Xbox and eat Taco Bell.
Yeah, I mean, I was in college when that came out, so.
Yeah, that's right. You had a little bit more of a mature brain,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it, and I realized like the impact of it, and it had some significance too, just because like, damn, it's like they're trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
That nobody else is like saying. So it's like, but yeah, I was way more interested in way more things.
Yeah.
It definitely didn't.
Like girls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
More like World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Girls were like maybe second or third on the list. WoW
Yeah.
was number one, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
Why'd you ask that question?
Well, I was just curious. Just because, yeah, you guys were young when that came out, so.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You didn't know what to do with that information. Like TJ said, just
that's the thing.
cool story, but let's move on.
There was nothing to do with that information. That's the thing. It's like I didn't really do anything with that information either. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's like your point is like Peter Joseph would have done a hell of a job if he had mentioned Bitcoin in his second movie.
Holy crap, dude. We'd all be like so rich right now.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what? Just buy Bitcoin.
That's a call to action, dude.
I'm in, dude.
Just buy Bitcoin, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it might not fully solve like what it is we've identified as problems with our culture.
Yeah, but at least
in
you're
this
not
film.
depending on the government.
Yeah, at least there's something here that's like counter to all
Yeah.
these things we've identified as like evils.
And,
like,
and Peter Joseph never really recognized Bitcoin as like something useful.
no, he says it like
And he still doesn't.
it's the opposite of a useful thing. It's like it's an extension of all these things that harm us
Yes.
as a
Yeah,
species. It's
pretty
like,
much, yeah.
damn it. Fuck.
Yeah.
Oh well. Whatever, dude.
What a whiff.
So apologies again for anybody who's made it this far and has to deal with our coughs, dude.
Yeah.
This is annoying as hell.
Yeah, for sure.
He's getting plagued.
Yeah, it feels like it's every week, dude.
Yeah. It's been a while for me, but man, yeah, this sucks. I can't even talk.
Yeah. I'm curious, anyone listening to this or watching this, I want to know if you've watched the Zeitgeist movement. Please let us know in the comment section below. I'm curious.
And yeah, should we, even though we're obviously busy on, maintaining things like NAT itself, building out new features for NAT.fun. By the way, we have a really cool revamp for the Vibe Studio.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's fucking...
I think by the time you watch this video, the revamp is out.
Okay, so if you don't know what the Vibe Studio is, it's basically like before it was literally just like a prompt entry box for like,
Yeah.
build a collection. And it's like, good luck.
Yeah.
Now it's like, it's way more navigated, way more processed.
Yeah, you were surprised with some of my outputs.
Very surprised. And it's literally like, I was hoping it could get to this point, and it has. So therefore, I'm drastically, I don't know, like more bullish on the prospects of, NFTs finding its place again in the in the market.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Should we tease what we're gonna do with NAT.fun as a whole? Like where we're gonna take it next?
Sure, if you want.
Yeah. So we're planning on supporting Robinhood.
Wow, great tease, dude.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, but how we do it is gonna be interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's just like launching on Robinhood. Like that's kind of lame.
Yeah.
It's how you're launching in, what like the fundamentals of launching. Like it's kind of different.
Yeah, because part of NAT.fun's roadmap was always going to be like supporting EVM at some point in time, like Ethereum. Like you can't just DMT can't just exist in Solana, right? It needs to exist on Ethereum as well, right?
Yeah.
But Robinhood definitely does bring in like a new ingredient into the EVM like ecosystem that didn't exist before, right? So it makes a lot of sense to like again bring the capability to launch not just tokens but also NFTs and then pair them to the value of RWAs, right? It's like, that's pretty cool. It's very interesting, novel, so it's something we want to kind of like dabble with.
Yeah, speaking of RWAs, you don't think NAT is like a version of RWA? Like it's a tokenized security, like actual tokenized security.
I mean, it's not I don't know. It's not a thing that's like
I mean, it
technically birthed through like physics, I guess, like matter. It's like digital matter, right? It's like some other thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like RWAs is like, it's literally, there's value in the material like manifestations here on Earth.
Yeah.
We've built markets around that. So it's like, let's port that on chain, basically. Port that into our digital realms.
Maybe a better analogy would be like there's a volatility index for stocks, and it's like an actual chart that charts the volatility.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's a better representation of what NAT is, because NAT is a chart of the security of Bitcoin. If market cap is high, security is high.
Right.
And so, I'm just trying to think of different ways to kind of explain NAT. And because NAT is no different than what we've already done. NAT is the tokenization of security, as is USDT is the tokenization of a dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so real world assets are tokenizations of hard things, Pokemon cards, etc.
Yeah, I don't know. It's for me personally, it's a hard sell, dude. I like NAT being like its digital native self, right? It is. Yes, of course, its value is like forever linked to the real world commodity of like energy consumption, right? Like that's just like Bitcoin, right? Like that is part of its like its underlying presence, right?
Yeah.
Without that like consumption of energy on Earth, it's like Bitcoin, therefore, is disrupted, and it's like immutable nature. Therefore, things like NAT and other DMT derivatives are also disrupted. So there's a linking there, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't classify it as an RWA. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, which again, that's why it's interesting, right? Exploring these RWA waters, because it's a whole new classification of things that couldn't exist on chain yesterday that does exist today, right?
Yeah.
So like, what can we do with that? We need to be figuring that out. That's the whole point of crypto, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited. I want to see, as soon as we get NAT.fun on Robinhood, I think things are getting super interesting. All right, that's it for us. That's been the Block Runner podcast. If you have any questions on Zeitgeist, the NAT token, the security budget on Bitcoin, let us know in the comment section below. I appreciate you for watching, and we will catch you in the next video.
Peace.